The plane had not even taken off yet, but a man's dignity had already been stolen right in front of strangers. All because of a seat. One seat yet, it carried his entire life. Marcus Ellis stood still in the cold Denver morning air, where the sky was heavy with dew, and the sunlight had barely brushed the airport's tall glass panels. But inside him, a storm was turning slowly. No one around him could see it, because from the outside, Marcus looked like nothing more than an ordinary black man in a navy polo shirt, dark jeans and spotless white sneakers, a typical traveler, nothing worth a second glance. No luxury watch, no designer luggage, no bodyguards, no assistants. But if they knew the truth, if they knew that the man standing at gate B-22 owned a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars, if they knew he was a major shareholder of the very airline they were about to fly, they would not have looked through him as if he were just another shadow in the rushing crowd. Marcus breathed slowly, trying to steady his pulse after 3 days of back-to-back conferences that lasted past midnight. Meetings, negotiations, contracts to review, all stacking on top of each other like stones pressing down on his chest. He just wanted to get back to Atlanta, lean his head against the window of seat 2A, close his eyes, and let the quiet morning swallow all his exhaustion. 2A was not just a seat. It was a reward, a reminder to himself, you made it, Marcus. And he believed that once he settled into that seat, everything would finally calm down. But peace had a habit of disappearing at the very moment people needed it most. Marcus entered the Sky Lounge, grabbed an Americano sat by the window, and watched crowds drift past like the moving currents of a miniature city. He read the news, skimmed past an article about a CEO forced to apologize for an overbooking scandal. He let out a short, sharp laugh. They never learn. The smile tasted tired. Then the announcement appeared. Boarding for flight 427 to Atlanta is now starting. Marcus stood up, gathered his scattered thoughts, and walked out with the composed, deliberate stride of someone used to seeing the world from a position of control. And that was when he saw her. A woman around 45, small in frame, but carrying herself with the arrogance of someone who believed the airport was her private property. A neat blonde bob, a cream blazer, pearl earrings. She looked like the type of person who expected the world to bow its head whenever she approached. When Marcus walked past, she glanced at him for a fraction of a second. That look, a sideways glance, stabbed at an old memory in his chest, the memory of days when he was mistaken for an assistant or a courier inside the very office he had built. He thought he had moved past that feeling, but looks like hers always managed to scratch at wounds he thought had healed. His boarding group was called. Marcus showed his phone. The agent scanned it with a smile. He stepped into the jet bridge, inhaling the cool air that drifted through, feeling as though the sky itself had opened a door to offer him the first quiet moment of the week. He had no idea that in that very moment, that quiet was about to be torn apart like thin paper. Marcus entered first class, the scent of premium leather, soft golden lighting, the sounds of rolling luggage and seat belts clicking into place. He turned toward row 2, seat 2A, right in front of him. But his heart froze, his mind jolted. Someone was sitting there, not by accident, not by confusion, not the kind of mistake where someone says, "Oh, I read the row wrong." She, Susan Miller, the woman he had just seen at the gate, sat with her legs crossed in his seat, as if 2A were a family heirloom. Her handbag rested neatly beside her. Her phone was in her hand, and the thing that punched Marcus in the gut was her expression, the indifferent look she gave him. She looked at him for exactly 3 seconds. She smiled faintly, coldly, politely, to the point of being insulting, then turned back to her phone as if he had never existed. Marcus stood there. For a few seconds he said nothing, not because he was afraid, but because of the familiar feeling, the feeling that men like him lived with their whole lives, being underestimated, dismissed, overlooked because of how they looked. All of it seemed to rise from seat 2A, his seat like a silent provocation. He inhaled deeply. His voice was low, steady, without a shake or rush. "Excuse me, I think you're in the wrong seat. This is 2A. Susan looked up. She smiled again, thinner, sharper. "I am in 2A. "Are you sure?" Marcus tilted his head. "I'm sure. My ticket says 2A. Susan raised her phone screen as if she were presenting irrefutable evidence in court. "Here, see 2A. But it was not 2A. Clearly 3C. Undeniably." Marcus spoke slowly, keeping his voice from slipping into the anger he had spent a lifetime learning to restrain. "Look at it carefully. That's 3C. Susan frowned, then let out a soft laugh, the kind of laugh that could burn anyone's patience. No, I always sit in 2A. I can't be wrong." Marcus felt heat crawl up his spine. "No one has a permanent seat on a plane." "Maybe they printed my ticket wrong," Susan replied, crossing her arms like a queen granting favors. "Why don't you just take 3C for now? Problem solved." At that moment, in the luxurious quiet of first class, the sounds around Marcus seemed to fade. In his mind, he heard echoes of old questions. "Are you sure you're in first class? Do you work here? Can I speak to your supervisor?" Questions he had once brushed off, telling himself, "Let it go. You've earned your place." But sometimes, one seat, a small seat on a plane, could rip open decades of wounds he had hidden behind a polite smile. And that was when the exhaustion of the long week, the pressure on his pride, and the truth about who he really was began rising like water, breaking through the surface. Marcus looked directly at Susan, calm but made of steel. "You're sitting in my seat." He didn't say anything more, didn't do anything else. But that moment was the spark. And within minutes, no one would expect that the woman who believed she had the right to claim seat 2A would be stunned to learn the truth, that the man she had just dismissed was one of the most powerful figures connected to the airline she was about to fly. The storm had not begun, but the wind had already changed direction. Marcus did not take his eyes off Susan, but the moment he opened his mouth again, a voice cut in from behind him, cold and sharp beneath a layer of artificial politeness. Haley Clark, the first-class flight attendant, stepped forward with the confidence of someone who believed a simple, "May I see your ticket," could smooth out any conflict. But when her eyes drifted past Marcus and landed on Susan, something flickered in her gaze, a small bias, an unconscious judgment, a familiar assumption in the industry, one Marcus had quietly endured too many times. Marcus spoke slowly, each word steady and precise, his voice held taut like a tightened string. "She was sitting in my seat, 2A. Haley looked up. "May I see your ticket?" Marcus handed it over immediately. Haley checked it and nodded. "Yes, 2A is yours." Then she turned to Susan, took her phone and studied it for a long time. A very long time. But when she finally looked up, she still wore that gentle smile the kind airlines trained their staff to use whenever they needed to disguise avoidance. "Your seat is 3C, ma'am." Susan did not move an inch. She let out a short, empty laugh, filled with attitude. "I always sit in 2A. Haley shrugged, as if she had dealt with this type of passenger hundreds of times. Marcus waited for the only sentence he needed to hear: "Ma'am, please return to your assigned seat." But that sentence never came. Instead, Haley turned to Marcus, her voice soft, gentle, as if she were offering him a favor. "Would you be willing to sit in 3C just for today?" Marcus stood motionless. In that brief second, it felt like frost swept through his chest. Not because of the request, but because of how familiar it was. Everything around him blurred together like layers of memory folding on top of one another. The day he walked into a boardroom, only to be told to wait for the manager. The day he signed a multi-million-dollar deal. Yet the recipient extended their hand to his young white assistant. Instead, the day he stood on stage receiving an award while the audience asked which department he worked in. All of those moments condensed into one question: could you take another seat? A simple sentence. A familiar sentence. A sentence someone like him had heard 100 times in 100 different places. Marcus closed his eyes, opened them. His breathing slowed, then deepened. "I paid for 2A. I will sit in 2A. Haley bit her lip. She was not expecting that answer. She did not want to be the one forced to make Susan move. She did not want to be the villain. So she turned back to Susan, her voice half pleading. "Ma'am, would you please return to seat 3C? Susan folded her arms. "No, I got here first. He came later. He can move back 1 row. A soft wow slipped from a passenger by the window. A middle-aged man shook his head and whispered, "Unbelievable." But Susan ignored it all. She placed another pillow on her lap, as if marking her territory. Marcus felt something shift inside him, slowly, but powerfully, a feeling he had spent decades suppressing. Not anger, clarity. The realization that if he backed down one more time, he would be doing it not just for himself, but dragging behind him all the people who did not have what he had: no equity in the airline, no voice on the board, no privilege to push back. Haley adjusted her uniform, sighed, then lowered her voice. "I am only trying to keep the flight from being delayed." Marcus smiled, a real smile, but one that was not concession, it was a warning. Some things are worth delaying. The sentence made Haley freeze. Her expression changed. Susan jerked upright eyes, widening. "Excuse me. Are you threatening to delay the flight, I am saying?" Marcus replied that I will not leave my seat. He lifted his carry-on and placed it in the overhead bin, the motion firm and decisive, as if he were closing a door he had kept cracked open his whole life. Then he sat in 2A, back straight, hands resting lightly on the armrests, his gaze facing forward, not looking at Susan, not looking at Haley, simply looking ahead, as if 2A had never been touched. Haley stood frozen. Susan let out a sharp laugh. "This is non-cooperative behavior. I am reporting this to the purser." She pressed the call button, almost channeling all her pride into the force of her finger. And when the small light above them switched on, Marcus felt the atmosphere around him shift. The disrespect had already happened, but whatever justice came next would come from him. No one knew who he was. No one knew how much power he truly held. And that ignorance made Susan and Haley even more confident that they were dealing with a man they could push into a corner. They had no idea that the man they were trying to shove out of 2A was capable of freezing an entire flight with a single sentence. A tall figure appeared at the far end of the cabin. Brian Cooper, the purser. His face calm, shaped by years of handling situations like this. But no one knew that today would be unlike any other day. Brian stopped in front of Marcus. "Would you mind taking seat 3C so we can depart on time?" A light question, but beneath it lay the weight of misplaced authority. Marcus looked straight into Brian's eyes. No. And when that word fell, the first-class cabin seemed to tremble, not from volume, but from absolute certainty. A passenger in the row behind murmured, "This is about to get big." Yes, very big, because in just a few minutes the system they were trying to protect would be forced to stop. By the very man they were trying to push one row back. Brian froze for a moment at that single word, a word that seemed as light as a breeze, yet slammed into the tense cabin like a drumbeat. No one in first class dared breathe too hard. Every gaze locked onto Marcus as if they were witnessing a fragile rope pulled to the edge of its limit. Susan let out a sharp, mocking laugh, a laugh as cutting as a blade. How ridiculous. Who do you think you are to sit there like that? It is just a seat. Marcus turned his head. His eyes were not angry, not sharp, but still deep like water with no visible bottom. Sometimes that calm was what made people shiver. It was not loud. It did not explode. It warned. "I do not think I am anyone," he said quietly. "I am simply sitting in the seat that is mine." Susan began to speak, but Brian lifted a hand to silence her. He straightened, adjusted his tie, then turned to Haley and said in a low voice, "Call the captain." Haley startled. "Are you sure the flight will be delayed?" Brian narrowed his eyes, sensing he stood at the edge of a cliff where one small decision could send the entire system he was protecting tumbling down. Call the captain. Susan exhaled as if she had just been handed reinforcements. "Finally someone will take care of this," she muttered. She believed that as long as the crew was large enough, firm enough, authoritative enough, Marcus would be forced to stand up, just like every other black man she had decided was not worth the trouble. She had no idea that this very thought was about to push her into a storm she could not escape. The cockpit door swung open. Captain Douglas Hayes stepped out, tall, salt and pepper hair, eyes sharp like polished steel. A single glance from him silenced the cabin completely. He looked at Susan, at Marcus, at Haley, at Brian. And Marcus sensed something shift in that instant, as if the air had been dialed down to wait for the first explosion. "What is the issue?" the captain asked. Haley spoke first, her voice small, as if she had been forced to admit fault. "Sir, there is a seat conflict. This passenger," she gestured to Marcus, "refuses to move to 3C. Marcus spoke, calm and firm. "I am not refusing to move. I am refusing to be removed from the seat I paid for." The captain nodded slowly. He held out his hand. "Boarding passes." Marcus handed his over immediately. Susan handed hers after her eyes, drifting as if the paper might betray her. The captain looked at both for 3 seconds. Then he lifted his head. "2A belongs to Mr. Ellis. 3C belongs to Mrs. Miller." First class erupted in whispers, soft claps and satisfied looks, as if fairness had finally taken its place. But that relief did not last. Susan remained rooted, trembling from a mixture of embarrassment and lifelong arrogance. "Please," she said, her voice cracking, "I am already sitting here. I was here first." I surely not just because she stopped herself. But everyone heard what she meant to say, the sentence that would have turned the whole cabin against her. The captain stared at Susan with fading patience. "Mrs. Miller, return to your assigned seat." Susan's face flushed red, as if struck across her pride. She leaned toward Marcus and whispered what no one expected her to dare say. You are blowing this out of proportion. It is just a seat." A man behind them stood up. "No, ma'am, you are the one blowing it out of proportion. You are in the wrong." A woman added, "He already said it. It is not just a seat. It is respect." A younger voice from economy shouted, "You sit in the wrong seat and you are yelling. Go back to your seat already." Susan gripped her bag strap, her face twisting with humiliation. She could no longer hide. She was about to back down. Almost. But she snapped. "If we continue like this, the flight will be late." "Captain, are you really letting one disruptive passenger hold up the entire plane?" Marcus heard every word. And in that moment, something inside him, something he had been suppressing for years, burst open like a door slammed by wind. He rose to his feet. Slowly, inch by inch. The entire cabin fell silent. He looked straight at the captain. If this airline believes allowing the wrong person to take the seat of the right person is how order is maintained, then this plane will not take off. Someone gasped. "My God, he is!" The captain narrowed his eyes. "Mr. Ellis, that is a serious statement," Marcus answered instantly, without trembling, without anger, his voice solid as cold steel. "I am a major shareholder of Skyline Air, and I will not allow this to be treated as something small." Susan's mouth fell open. Brian froze. Haley stepped back. The captain straightened. The entire cabin seemed to explode in silent shock. One passenger murmured, "No wonder he did not back down." Another breathed out. They messed with the wrong person. And Marcus, in that moment, the man everyone thought was just another ordinary traveler, rose into full view with the true weight of who he was, a man with enough power to keep an entire aircraft grounded with a single sentence. Susan whispered, barely breathing, "Oh my God, But it was too late. Everyone had seen it. It was not just seat 2A that had been taken. It was a man's dignity being tested. And whatever happened next, nothing could stop it now. The front cabin door opened again. Two figures stepped inside, neither pilots nor flight attendants. No loud footsteps, no dramatic gestures, yet their presence instantly altered the atmosphere, as if someone had opened a window and let a cold wind sweep through. Laura Bennett, ground operations manager, tall hair tied neatly back, dressed in a fitted navy pantsuit, her gaze sharp, as though she were examining the scene of an accident. Beside her was Ethan Cole, an operations analyst, holding a tablet, slim, tall, with eyes as precise and cutting as a surgical blade, observing, registering, concluding. They entered like a response team, summoned for an emergency, and in that moment, every passenger understood that this had escalated far beyond a simple seat dispute. Susan was the first to freeze. She smoothed her blouse, adjusted her hair, trying to regain the appearance of someone who was important. "Finally, someone with authority is here," she declared, pointing at Marcus. "He is the one disrupting the entire flight." She attempted to speak loudly enough for Laura to hear, but not loud enough to appear unruly. But Laura did not look at her immediately. She simply extended her hand. Boarding passes. Marcus placed his ticket down first, steady, calm. Susan placed hers after her palm, sweating beneath the forced smile she wore. Laura looked for exactly 3 seconds. Ethan tilted his head, checking the data on his tablet. Then Laura lifted her gaze and spoke with a clarity that struck the cabin like a judge's gavel. "Seat 2A belongs to Mr. Marcus Ellis. Seat 3C belongs to Mrs. Susan Miller." The cabin erupted into excited whispers. Someone murmured. Finally, someone did the right thing. But Susan's face drained of color as if cold water had been poured over her. No, this cannot," she stammered. "I booked this seat. I always sit here. Perhaps your system is wrong." Laura looked at her with the expression of someone with no patience left for nonsense. "The system is not wrong. Your ticket is clear. You are in the wrong seat. You will return to your assigned position." Susan swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around her purse strap until her knuckles turned white. She looked at Marcus not as someone she dismissed earlier, but as a mirror reflecting her own pettiness. Yet the person she feared most stood in front of her, and it was not Marcus. It was Laura. "I already sat here," Susan whispered. "If I stand up now," she darted her eyes around, "everyone will think I am in the wrong." A man behind her said, plainly, "Because you are." The cabin burst into light laughter, not mockery, but release. The sound brought a burning red flush to Susan's face. Ethan finally spoke his voice, low and firm. "For everyone's understanding, Mr. Ellis is a major shareholder of Skyline Air. His customer status is at the high-value tier. Denying him a reasonable request violates service protocol." Haley stood frozen. Brian dropped his gaze, shoulders heavy with realization. Susan stumbled a step back, her arrogance shattering like glass on marble. You're a shareholder," she whispered in disbelief. Marcus looked at her, not angry, not vindictive, only tired and honest. "I told you, I am not taking another seat." Laura drew a steady breath and delivered a sentence that no one expected to be the final end of all arguments. "Mrs. Miller, you have two options. 1, return to seat 3C. 2, leave the aircraft immediately." Whispers rippled through the cabin. A woman murmured, "This is the first time I have seen the airline handle something this directly." Susan clutched her bag tightly, her lips trembling. "This is humiliation. I am a loyal customer." Marcus cut in softly, but with the precision of a blade. Loyalty is not about years, it is about behavior. The cabin fell into silence. Laura looked at Susan one last time. "Do you choose to stay or leave?" Susan stared at the floor, clutching her bag as if her dignity were slipping through her fingers. Then finally she walked toward row 3. Applause erupted across the cabin, at first scattered, then growing louder. Not to degrade Susan, but because fairness had finally stood in the right place. Susan sat down in 3C, head-bowed hands, clasped tightly trembling. No one looked at her with respect anymore. No one treated her as someone worthy of priority. And in that moment, she understood that what she had lost was not a seat, but the illusion that she was always right, always privileged, always protected by familiarity and favoritism. Laura turned to Marcus. "On behalf of Skyline Air, I offer my deepest apology." Marcus nodded. No resentment, no pride, only a quiet resolve. In his eyes, something had closed. Not anger, determination. Ethan leaned closer to Laura. "This will have to be reported to upper management." She nodded. "I know. And we will have to change many things after today." Laura and Ethan left the cabin. The door closed behind them. The aircraft prepared for pushback. But no one forgot what had happened. Because even though the flight would take off in a few minutes, a much larger lesson was just beginning to take shape. Not for Susan, but for an entire system. The cabin slowly settled after Laura and Ethan left, but the silence that followed was not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that lingers after a lightning strike, a charged stillness where everyone remained shaken by what they had just witnessed. Marcus sat back in seat 2A, adjusted his seat belt, but there was no calm in him. He did not feel triumphant. He did not feel victorious. Only an expanding emptiness spread through his chest, the familiar kind carried by those who have had to fight for their dignity, their entire lives, the kind that comes when justice finally arrives late and heavy, offering no joy, only exhaustion. He turned toward the window where the runway stretched under Denver's harsh white sunlight. Another aircraft taxied slowly by its engines, rumbling like the weary sigh of a steel giant. But in that sound, Marcus heard something else echoes he had buried long ago. The day a building security guard stopped him because he could not believe Marcus was the CEO. The day he walked into a meeting and someone handed him a catering staff jacket. The day he signed a major client contract only to be asked, "Where is your boss?" Old burns he thought had healed were reopened by the simple theft of a seat 2A claimed through arrogance. A low voice spoke beside him. "You did the right thing." Marcus turned. The middle-aged man in 2B, who had remained silent throughout the ordeal, looked at him with rare respect. Not pity, not surprise. Recognition. He extended his hand. "I am Richard. I saw everything from the start. And I just wanted to say thank you for not staying quiet." Marcus shook his hand, steady and composed. "Thank you." Richard leaned in slightly. "Not everyone has the courage to do that. I have seen plenty of passengers pushed aside just because the louder person insisted they were right. But today, you reminded people of the truth." Marcus lowered his gaze to his hands, hands that had signed contracts that kept his company alive, hands that pulled him from poverty into power. Yet even these hands had just fought to keep a seat he had paid for. A woman behind him, around 60, leaned forward. "I wanted to tell you I am proud of you. We all saw that it was unfair. You never raised your voice. You did not cause trouble. You simply stood up for what was right. And that inspired all of us." Marcus offered a small smile, soft as a thread, yet enough to pull his heart back into place. "Thank you." From the next row, a young man in a baseball cap spoke up. "I recorded everything. In case the airline tries to blame you, they cannot. I will post it if necessary." Marcus turned slightly. There is no need to retaliate. But if posting it helps others after me get treated fairly, do it. The young man nodded, his eyes burning with a sense of purpose. In row 3, Susan sat, still turned away, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. No one spoke to her. No one touched her. No one tried to make her feel better. The silence around her carried no cruelty, but it fell over her like stones dropped onto water, each one a truth she now had to face. And what she felt in that moment, Marcus understood all too well. She was not being isolated. She was simply for the first time tasting the consequences of the arrogance people had always avoided calling out. The engines grew louder. The aircraft began pushing back from the gate. Haley walked past 2A, unable to meet Marcus's eyes. Her voice was barely audible over the hum. "I am sorry for earlier. I didn't handle it properly." Marcus did not look up. His voice was low, steady, without resentment. "Do better next time. For others too. Not just for me." Haley froze for a second, then nodded, as if sealing a promise. As the plane turned toward the runway, Marcus closed his eyes. Not to rest, but to keep every piece of what had just happened, every word of support, every look, every apology, even Susan's trembling hands. Because he knew one thing clearly. The flight would last only a few hours, but the aftershocks of that moment would stay with these people for months, maybe even years. Sometimes, to change a massive system, you do not need speeches or slogans. You just need one person who refuses to give up the seat that was rightfully theirs. The plane's wheels touched the Atlanta runway with a gentle thud, yet no one in first class felt like they had just finished an ordinary flight. When the seatbelt sign turned off, Marcus opened his eyes, took a deep breath, and slowly stood. His body was tired, but his mind had never been clearer. What had happened was not a small incident in the sky. It was a reminder that the world still carried cracks only courage could illuminate. Passengers rose row by row, but no one pushed or hurried. Everyone kept a respectful distance around Marcus, as if he had just stepped out of a battle they all witnessed, though none of them had taken the blows for him. A tall man placed a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you. You made me think differently about staying silent." Marcus nodded, saying nothing. He did not want to turn this moment into a speech. There was no need. The truth had spoken for itself. Phones lit up across the cabin, replaying the videos, switching angles, every word sharp and unmistakable. A young woman watched her recording with wide eyes. "This is definitely going to spread fast." Her voice held no excitement, only awe. Marcus understood. One act of standing up at the right moment could shift the awareness of hundreds, sometimes millions. As the line began moving toward the exit, Marcus walked slowly with them. No one rushed ahead. No one brushed past him. It was as though they were escorting a key witness out of the scene of something significant. In row 3, Susan stood up. She clutched her bag straps tightly, her shoulders trembling. When Marcus passed by, she did not look up. Not from fear, but because she could not bear to face the truth pressing heavily on her. In that fleeting moment, Marcus sensed something in her, not full regret, but the very first crack of realization that her entire life had been padded by a kind of privilege that today had finally met its boundary. Her silence echoed louder than any apology. The engines softened. The plane rolled toward the gate. Haley walked past seat 2A, unable to meet his eyes. Her voice was so small, it nearly dissolved into the ambient noise. "I am sorry for earlier. I handled it poorly." Marcus did not lift his gaze. His voice remained low, steady, without anger. "Do better next time. For others, too. Not just me." Haley paused, then nodded firmly, as if sealing a promise with herself. When the plane turned into the jet bridge, Marcus closed his eyes. Not to rest, but to hold in his memory everything that had happened. The voices of support, the looks, the apologies, even Susan's shaking hands. Because he knew one thing. The flight would last only a few hours, but the aftershocks of this moment would stay with these people for months, maybe years. Sometimes, to change a system, you do not need speeches or slogans. You only need one person who refuses to surrender the seat that should have been theirs. When the cabin door opened, the warm Atlanta air felt different, almost welcoming, as if the city itself was opening its arms to him. But Marcus knew he still had one task left, something more important than any apology he had heard. While passengers scattered toward different hallways, Marcus stepped aside near an empty chair. He opened his phone. His finger scrolled through his list of top-level Skyline Air contacts names with influence and authority. But he didn't call. He opened an email instead. Subject line: Urgent accountability required. The first line: I want to report a serious incident involving crew behavior and a failure to uphold customer respect. His words were sharp as a blade, but carried no bitterness, only clarity, logic, determination. He described every detail not to retaliate, but to expose something far bigger: unconscious bias, misplaced deference, the fear of confronting the wrong person instead of protecting what was right. He pressed send. His phone buzzed seconds later. A message from Richard, the man seated beside him. I spoke to some of the other passengers. Everyone agrees you helped us see something we have all been avoiding for a long time. Thank you. Marcus read the message and smiled faintly. Not a smile of victory, a smile of someone who had done the right thing, fully aware of the responsibility that followed. As he rolled his luggage across the terminal, the rhythmic clatter echoed behind him. Each sound pulled him farther from the chaos of the plane, yet one truth grew louder. With every step, the people who witnessed what happened today would never see a similar situation the same way again. At the exit, Marcus paused and breathed in deeply. Sunlight spilled across the glass and stretched over his face in a long, bright stripe. In that moment, he felt the weight of what the flight had tried to strip away. The right to stand up for oneself is not only a right, it is a responsibility. A responsibility no one teaches, but life demands. His driver approached and opened the back door. Marcus placed his suitcase inside and sat down. As the car pulled away from the airport, he leaned back and watched the buildings glide past the window. No applause, no spotlight, no glamorous retelling. But he knew, and everyone on that flight knew. The moment one person refused to step back, the entire room changed. And sometimes a single, calm, unwavering sentence, "I will not leave my seat," becomes the thread that forces a whole system to confront itself. Morning sunlight spilled across the city of Atlanta, scattering bright, glass-like reflections over every rooftop. But inside the office of the chairman of Skyline Air, the atmosphere was the opposite: dense, heavy, and bracing for a storm. James Waltham, the 58-year-old CEO of Skyline Air, was not the kind of man who lost composure easily. He had led the airline through blizzards, staffing crises, flight safety disputes, and even data breach scandals. But the email from Marcus Ellis the night before had kept him awake. That name, Marcus Ellis, was not a typical name found in the complaint inbox. He was a major shareholder, a voice with influence at the board level, and more importantly, a man whose reach in the tech media and finance industries was anything but small. If Marcus decided to bring this situation to the public, Skyline Air would pay far more than an apology. James placed his hand on the printed email in front of him. Every sentence was clear, precise, and sharp, never harsh, yet powerful enough to outline the entire embarrassing incident. A passenger robbed of his seat, the crew siding with the wrong person, the system choosing convenience over fairness, and a passenger told to be silent so the flight would not be delayed. A small incident that revealed a large problem. James stood abruptly. "Call an emergency meeting." On the 42nd floor, the meeting room glowed under bright lights as department heads filed in with tense expressions. Laura Bennett, the manager who had confronted the situation with Marcus the day before, sat upright with her report aligned neatly in front of her. Ethan Cole sat beside her tablet in hand chin, slightly raised, as if ready to defend every piece of data he had captured. When James entered the room, fell silent. "We have a serious problem," he said. No one dared breathe. "The issue is not the passenger. It is not the seat. The issue is our culture. The way our team chose to avoid confronting the person in the wrong simply because she was louder. And the way they treated the person in the right as if he should move because it was convenient." Laura pressed her pen to the table, her eyes straight as an arrow. I take full responsibility for the incident. But I want to say this. If Mr. Ellis had not insisted on staying in his seat, the truth would have been buried. Ethan nodded. And if passengers did not record the video, we would be dealing with a completely different version of the story today. James leaned forward, his palms flat on the table, looking at each person one by one. What worried him most was not the incident itself, but the speed at which passenger reactions were spreading. Videos from the flight had already appeared on the airline's internal network. A few more hours and it would erupt externally. Suddenly, a voice came through the building's intercom. "Mr. Ellis has arrived." The entire room froze. They had assumed he would only send an email. No one expected Marcus to come in person. The door opened. Marcus stepped inside. No bodyguards, no dramatic presence. Just a calmness that immediately shifted the rhythm of the room. He wore a white dress shirt under a light grey blazer. No tie. His posture was straight, his expression sharp, yet not hostile. "Sorry I am late," Marcus said softly, and that gentle tone somehow felt like a massive door had closed behind everyone in the room. James moved forward to shake his hand. "Marcus, thank you for coming. We wanted to hear your perspective directly." Marcus looked around the table. His eyes passed over Laura, Ethan, the HR team, the flight safety team, operations, PR, each person one by one, as if he were weighing their readiness with a single glance. "I did not come here to demand compensation. I did not come to have someone fired immediately. I came to speak about something your airline has faced for a long time, but always avoids." The room leaned toward him, drawn by an invisible force. Marcus continued, "A system doesn't collapse because of one big mistake. It collapses because of small ones that are ignored every day. Biases, favoring loudness over truth, trying to avoid upsetting the wrong customer by pushing the burden onto the right one. And worse, assuming the calmness of a black passenger is weakness." The HR director lowered her head. Laura tightened her sleeves. Marcus spoke each word with precision. "Yesterday was not the first time I experienced something like this, and it will not be the last unless the issue is fixed at its root." James stood still, saying nothing. Marcus turned to him. "Skyline Air has a good culture, but culture only lives if it is enforced. If the frontline team is not properly trained, every value written above them becomes nothing more than a slogan." He lifted his phone and projected dozens of passenger videos onto the meeting room's screen. Left angles, right angles, voices of passengers, their objections, every detail of what had happened. The entire room stopped breathing. One clip played. "He is right. Why are they asking him to move?" Another, this would not be a conversation if their roles were reversed. And then the final clip, Marcus's calm, steady declaration that had stopped an entire cabin. "I will not leave my seat." Marcus stopped the video. The light in the room suddenly felt colder. "I do not want Skyline Air to be the airline people talk about because of injustice. I want it to be the airline people choose because of fairness. But that only happens if yesterday is not treated as an incident, but as a warning." The room froze as if encased in ice. James took a deep breath. "Marcus, what do you want us to do?" Marcus spoke slowly, each word heavy as iron. "Retrain the entire crew on handling conflict and unconscious bias. Fix the policy so no one is ever allowed to ask a paying passenger to leave their seat for any reason. And most importantly, change the way employees are evaluated. Not based on smooth operations, but based on fairness. Laura looked at Marcus, her eyes glistening, as if she had just seen a new path open before her. Marcus concluded, fairness is not about pleasing the person who is right. It is about having the courage to confront the person who is wrong. No one spoke. No one moved. But every person in that room understood they had been placed on a new dividing line, the line between what was easy and what was right. Marcus stood, adjusted his collar, nodded to James and walked out of the room. The door closed behind him. No applause, no praise. Only the silence of people who had just witnessed something rare, the moment a single man forced an entire system to look directly at itself. Marcus stepped out of the Skyline Air headquarters and into the bright morning sunlight that spilled across the sidewalk like a sheet of golden silk. But there was no absolute peace inside him. Big conversations always left an aftershock in the speaker's chest, and he could feel that tremor spreading slowly like ripples moving outward after a stone hits still water. The car carried him farther from the glass tower behind him, yet the faces from the meeting room still lingered in his mind, the uneasy look from the operations director, the regret in HR's eyes, the awakening in Laura's expression, and the heavy, troubled gaze of CEO James, as if he had just realized how close they had come to losing the reputation that took years for the airline to build. Marcus did not know whether they would change quickly or slowly, but he knew they had no choice. Yesterday's story was no longer in anyone's hands. It now belonged to social media, a force no one could stop once it began to ignite. His phone vibrated again and again in his pocket, but Marcus did not check it immediately. He wanted a few minutes of quiet, a moment to let his breath catch up to everything unfolding around him. Atlanta drifted past the car window, restaurants, buildings, tree-shaded streets all moving like an ordinary stream of life. But inside, Marcus knew his world was no longer quite the same. When the car stopped at his company's building, Marcus stepped out. The receptionist greeted him as usual, but as he passed through the revolving door, a young co-worker near the coffee machine froze when she recognized him. She looked at him with a mix of confusion and respect. "I saw the video. I did not know you looked so calm, and they—" She stopped, as if unsure how to phrase the rest. "It is all right," Marcus replied gently. "The truth matters more than who speaks it." He stepped into the elevator. Just before the door shut, his phone vibrated again. This time he checked it. Social media seemed to be on fire. One person had posted, "This man just taught me a lesson in dignity." Another wrote, "The airline owes a public apology. This is a systemic failure." A clip contrasting Susan's hostility with Marcus's calmness had already reached hundreds of thousands of views in just hours. Marcus scrolled through the comments. Many were angry. Many shared similar experiences. Many thanked him for refusing to stay silent. But there were other voices, too twisted narratives, comments clinging desperately to bias, blaming him for making a scene. Marcus read everything, but he did not react. He did not need to. What he needed to say, he had already said, on the plane, and the video had spoken for him ever since. That afternoon, when Marcus walked across to the next building for a meeting with a client, a young employee in the lobby stared at him for a long moment. Then the boy approached a bit shaky. "Mr. Ellis, I just wanted to say thank you. My father went through something like that on a plane once, but he never had the chance or the strength to speak up the way you did." Marcus looked at him, his eyes softening. Change does not start with the strong. It starts with the one who dares to speak. And sometimes it takes just one person. The young man nodded, eyes reddening. Marcus gave him a light pat on the shoulder and stepped outside. Atlanta's sky was darkening, the sunset laying a soft orange glow across the rooftops. Marcus paused at the curb for a few seconds, letting the breeze slip beneath his coat. He closed his eyes, letting the cool air wash off the weight still clinging to him after the morning meeting. When he opened them, a notification appeared on his phone. From CEO James, we have reviewed your requests. Skyline Air is now drafting a new policy and initiating an emergency training program. I would like to meet next week to discuss integrating the fare response system you proposed. Marcus stared at the message for a long moment. Not because he was surprised, but because he could feel something shifting slowly but undeniably. A bus rolled past, reflecting the setting sun onto his eyes. And in that moment, Marcus understood that yesterday had not just been a confrontation in the sky. It was the beginning of a conversation the entire aviation industry would be forced to face. Not because he sought power, but because he demanded fairness. And fairness, once given a voice, cannot be pushed back into silence. As night settled over Atlanta, the city lit up with long ribbons of yellow light stretching across its major roads, while Skyline Air stepped into a sleepless night. Videos of the incident continued to spread like fire in the wind. Within just a few hours, local news outlets began reporting on it. Some television stations even ran flashing red headlines, passenger asked to leave first-class seat, despite having paid for it. But what truly threw Skyline Air's PR department into chaos was the name appearing in the video's Marcus Ellis, a well-known tech CEO and one of the airline's major shareholders. This was no longer a seat dispute. It had become a challenge to the culture of an entire system. In Marcus's office, the lights were still on, even though it was nearly 10 o'clock. He sat before his large, black wooden desk, laptop open, but his eyes were not on the screen. He was thinking about the flight, about the faces that stood with him, about the heavy silence from Susan, and about the trembling voice of Haley apologizing at the jet bridge. No one is entirely bad, he thought. But being comfortable with what is wrong is sometimes more dangerous than the wrong itself. That was what he wanted to change. His phone lit up. A message from his close friend, Alex. I saw the video. You were calm in a terrifying way. Marcus let out a soft chuckle, not quite amusement, but gentle. He replied, I was not calm. I was not. I am just tired of having to explain what should be obvious. Another message arrived instantly. I get it, and I am proud of you. Marcus read it without responding. Some things need no words, only understanding. Suddenly, the internal communications team called. Marcus picked up. Mr. Ellis, sorry to disturb you so late. We want to inform you your video is spreading outside Skyline Air now. A major news network wants to interview you live tomorrow morning. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. He knew this was coming, but not this quickly. He did not want to turn the situation into a media weapon. He did not want to become the center of attention. He only wanted what was right to be acknowledged. I will consider it, Marcus said, before ending the call. He set the phone down and walked to the window. Below him, the city's roads glowed like the branching lines of a giant nervous system. A living city, breathing and moving, and he was a small part of it. But small things can create deep tremors when placed at the right moment. Across town, in her small apartment, Haley could not sleep either. She sat on her sofa, hands clasped tightly. Her phone buzzed non-stop with messages from the Skyline crew group chat. Questions poured in. What happened? Why did you let the wrong passenger sit first class? Why did you ask him to move instead of asking her to get up? Haley answered none of them. Each message only made the painful truth clearer. She had failed in the moment she needed to stand on the right side, and tomorrow she would have to face the consequences. A few blocks away, Brian sat before his computer, replaying the video that included him. The more he watched, the heavier he felt. He had always thought he handled situations well, believed that his duty was to keep the flight smooth. But he now understood. Smooth does not mean fair. His compromise had forced a passenger to stand up for what he should have defended as the airline's representative. Susan was different. She sat in her spacious bedroom, warm yellow lights on the walls, unable to soften the anger and humiliation inside her. Her phone was flooded with messages from friends. Is that you in the video? What happened? Why were you arguing with a shareholder of the airline? Susan muted everything and tossed the phone onto the bed. But when she lay down, Marcus's face kept resurfacing in her mind, not angry, but unnervingly calm. That look made her realize she was not the victim. She was the cause. The next morning, as the sun rose, Skyline Air's internal email system erupted like a hive disturbed. Every crew member received the same notice emergency all hands meeting at 9 a.m. No one knew exactly what would happen, but everyone knew it was the consequence of yesterday. At Marcus's office, several employees were already waiting to brief him. One handed him the morning news broadcast. Passenger forced out of paid first-class seat sparks major controversy, airline responds. On the screen, Marcus's face appeared. The moment he said, "I will not leave my seat," played again in slow motion, a caption underneath reading a turning point in calmness. Marcus watched for a few seconds, then turned it off. He did not want the story focused on him. He wanted it focused on the issue. By noon, an email from CEO James arrived. "We formally invite you to join the advisory team for process improvement and equity training. You will have direct influence in building the new program." Marcus exhaled slowly. He knew he could not refuse, not because of pride or power, but because if he declined, people without his position would continue enduring what he only managed to resist, because he was fortunate enough to have strength and status. That afternoon, as the meeting between Marcus and Skyline Air began, James entered with a thick stack of documents. But before he could speak, Marcus said, "I am not here to fix an incident. I am here to fix how people think about fairness." The room fell silent, not with tension, but with the stillness of a group ready to listen, ready to change. And in that moment, Skyline Air was no longer just an airline. It had become a test of an entire system, and this time it was a test that needed to be passed. The Skyline Air conference room, filled with the soft sounds of papers turning and pens tapping against the table, yet no one truly paid attention to those noises. Every gaze was fixed on Marcus, who stood at the presentation board with a calm, confident posture, not overpowering, not theatrical, simply clear and steady, like morning light breaking through the sky. James sat at the head of the table, fingers interlaced, leaning forward, as though he did not want to miss a single word. Laura and Ethan sat nearby, their expressions tense but focused, while the cabin management team and HR representatives lined both sides of the table, each with a different look, worry, embarrassment, caution, and even a hint of hope. Marcus began with one short sentence. "Good culture does not survive on slogans. It survives on repeated actions. An HR director nodded, but no one interrupted. Marcus clicked to the next slide. On the screen appeared a chart titled "The Consequences of Unconscious Bias." No one looked surprised yet when Marcus brought out real examples drawn from his own experiences, from passenger complaints the airline had ignored, from data showing that black passengers were asked to change seats more often than others. The room grew noticeably colder. Not because he was attacking them, but because he was peeling back a layer of truth they had only glanced at, never confronted. Marcus spoke evenly, without accusation. "I do not believe the people on yesterday's flight had bad intentions. They were simply used to choosing the easier option, and the easier option is often asking the calm person to step back. But when the calm person is the one who is right, and the loud person is the one who is wrong, that convenience becomes injustice." Someone in the training department placed a hand over their chest and bowed their head slightly. James set his pen down, his eyes digging through the layers of the issue. "So in your view, where should we begin?" Marcus switched to the next slide, revealing a short list, each item sharp as a blade. 1 full system-wide training on unconscious bias and conflict handling. 2, change the policy. No one is allowed to ask a passenger to leave their assigned seat when the ticket is clear. 3, empower frontline staff so they do not fear the next Mrs. Miller. 4, evaluate crew members based on fairness, not on keeping things smooth. 5, establish an internal reporting channel that allows passengers to escalate issues directly to higher management. Ethan whispered, "This is a framework we have never had." Laura looked over at James, her eyes bright, as if she had finally found a solid foundation after years of being forced to keep things calm. She murmured, "We need this." James looked around the table, then spoke slowly. "Not just need. We are obligated to do this." His gaze settled on Marcus. "Are you willing to be part of supervising this program?" Marcus nodded without hesitation. "I am. Not because it happened to me, but because there are people who cannot stand up the way I did." The room fell silent for a few seconds, a silence that made everyone feel that what they decided today would shape the experience of millions of passengers in the years to come. The meeting stretched on until late afternoon. When Marcus stepped out of the room, the last sunlight of the day cast a soft streak of orange across the floor, quiet and warm like the sun's own gesture of approval. James walked him to the elevator doors. "Marcus, thank you. Not just for your email, but for making us confront something we have avoided for too long." Marcus replied with a small smile. Not triumphant, not proud, simply at peace. Fairness does not appear on its own. It appears when people decide they will no longer stay still. The elevator opened. Marcus stepped inside. The doors closed slowly. Outside, James stood alone in the long hallway, the lights casting across his face as a single thought weighed heavily on him. One man refused to give up a seat, and because of that, an entire airline was forced to change. As for Marcus, when he walked out of the building, the approaching night did not make him feel tired, because he knew that sometimes a single moment of resolve is enough to shift the direction of an entire system. That flight had ended, but the journey of change had only just begun. From the perspective of an expert in organizational culture and human behavior, the story of Marcus Ellis goes far beyond a seating dispute on an airplane. It is a test of an entire system, a test in which people's reactions to what is wrong become the true measure of culture. Marcus did not prevail because he was louder. He prevailed because he stayed aligned with the truth, remained calm in the face of injustice, and chose to stand up at the very moment when silence would have been the easier path. And that single moment triggered a domino effect, forcing a large organization to confront the cracks within itself. This is a powerful reminder that lasting change does not begin in polished boardrooms. It begins in ordinary moments, when one person calmly says enough. If today's story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to continue following the journeys that reveal truth, protect dignity, and inspire meaningful change. And before you leave the video, comment exactly these 3 words. Respect comes first.